And joining me now is Congresswoman Nanette Barragán, there, I think I did it all right, Democrat from California and the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Congresswoman, I appreciate your being here. Thanks for making time to speak to us. The number of migrants, as we noted, crossing into the U.S. illegally is down by about 25%, according to the Department of Homeland Security, since the president took this executive action. There have, of course, been some glitches to this point, but would you at least agree that it has been effective in trying to stem the flow of migrants entering the U.S. illegally?
Well, first of all, it's too early to tell. Generally, when there's new orders, we always see a little bit of a drop-off. So it's too early to tell whether it's effective or not. I think the greater concern that I have and members of our caucus have is whether people who have valid asylum claims are being turned away. And that is what U.S. law provides that we should be able to do here. And that's an American value we have.
Did you concede that the administration, it does have the legal authority, though, to do what it has done to this point? So are you suggesting that they do not have the authority to, effectively not allow those asylum seekers to enter the United States?
Well, that's why there's a lawsuit going on, right? A court will make that decision. We know that when the former president used authority, it was actually struck down. So that's something that the courts will decide, not for me to decide. But what we have been asking the president to do is, if you're going to take action that's enforcement only, that doesn't work for Latino voters, and it's not going to help with our messaging to Latinos across the country. So if you have to do enforcement policies, make sure that you pair them with something positive, something we can go in and talk about it, and making sure that we're providing protections, for example, for undocumented folks that have been in this country for a very long time. They've been made promises for a long time. Congress has failed to act, but the president can. And that is what we continue to encourage him and implore him to do as quickly as possible.
Let me ask you, there has, of course, been widespread agreement about the urgent need to sort of address the crisis of migrants illegally entering the United States right now, a record number having done so since President Biden took office. What do you think he should have done in the course of the last several years?
Well, the first problem is that Republicans don't want to help do anything. And so they're preventing our ability to get the resources that are really needed at the southern border for more infrastructure, more processing, more judges, all of that.
Acknowledging all of that, they say that the president could do things unilaterally here as well. They claim that he could shut down the border unilaterally. What do you think he could do unilaterally, acknowledging the recalcitrance, the reluctance of Republicans to provide any help in this effort?
Well, I think there's got to be, the first question is, are there ways that we can provide more resources? There are some that say invoking the Stafford Act, saying that there is a crisis will allow that ability to give more resources down there. We have to make sure that there's more pathways so that people don't have to come between the ports of entry. Remember, that's why they're coming between the ports of entry, because they can't go to a port of entry. They either can't or they can't get an appointment on the CBP One app, right? That's already full. So people that are desperate fleeing violence need a pathway to come here. And right now, what we're doing is we're saying, no pathways, we're not going to do it. And that's where we believe is contrary to what the asylum law provides and what it should provide.
There's the politics, there's the policy, there is also the politics, as you know well here right now. President Biden won the Hispanic and Latino vote by 32 points in 2020, but our own recent polling from April shows President Biden leading Donald Trump by just 10 points right now among Latino voters in a hypothetical two-way race. He's 17 points apparently underwater, according to the recent polling, when it comes to Latino voters' approval of the way he is handling his job. How does he turn those numbers around? What in particular is the president failing to say to resonate with the Latino community, acknowledging, like any community, it is not a monolith?
Well, that's very true. Look, polls are polls. One poll says one thing, another poll says something else. What we got to do is we got to go engage. This is something the Hispanic Caucus has done. It's taken the Hispanic Caucus on the road to go into these growing Latino-populated areas to talk about what we have done, but then what he's going to continue to do and to finish the job. If you take a look at the information and the data, what he is fighting for is for what Latinos want. And just take a look at women's reproductive rights. What's happening across this country with states that are limiting access to women's reproductive rights and abortion, you have Latinos overwhelmingly believe that this is a right they should have. Nevada is a good place to look at. 81% of Latinos believe that there should be the ability for women to get reproductive health care and an abortion. That's something Trump didn't even talk about in his last rally there.
And Latinos widely, like a lot of Americans right now, talk about their top priority being the economy, though reproductive rights is clearly an important one as well. It's why the president focuses on the topic of the economy, not identity politics, but on pocketbook issues in this latest ad that he is doing right now. Should Latinos be satisfied with the way the president has handled the economy? Prices remain too high for a lot of Americans. Inflation, acknowledging coming out of a pandemic, was quite high, 40-year record it hit only a couple of years ago. Should they be satisfied with his handling of the economy?
I think that you definitely need to look and say Biden has done a whole bunch of things for Latinos as it impacts the economy. Unemployment is at a low number. The price of insulin is coming down. There's a lot of things we could talk about, but people don't feel it. And that is what is happening. People don't feel it yet. Some of these policies haven't gone into effect yet. The infrastructure law, another example, it's creating jobs. What kind of jobs? Construction jobs. Those are economic issues for Latinos.
So I get that they don't feel it. So how do you make them feel it if they don't feel it yet and you only got 5 months till Election Day? Some
of that is the policies haven't been implemented yet. I mean, just take a look at the IRA and the energy
Inflation
savings
Reduction
there,
Act, yep.
right? The energy savings there people don't feel because they haven't been rolled out yet. And this is the whole argument. Look, this president inherited a horrible situation from Donald Trump with COVID. He brought us back from COVID, right? We put money into the American Rescue Plan. We put money in the infrastructure bill. All of these things, now we need to let him finish the job, and needs 4 more years to do that. Yeah. So we need to go across this country. We need to talk about what's been done, but also what he is going to continue to do along with House Democrats to make sure that they're in a better position. And let's not forget here, the contrast is that Donald Trump is not for Latinos. It's not for making sure that he's not watching out for their economic interest. He's for more tax cuts for the rich. That is not the population we're talking about with Latinos.
Yeah, Congresswoman Nanette Barragán, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.